Hey, welcome to the Sleepy History world. Before we begin, get comfortable, settle into your favorite sleeping position, and let the noise of the modern world slowly fade away. Tonight, we're stepping behind the elegant curtains of Victorian high society to discover what rich Victorian women really did all day. Their lives looked effortless from the outside, filled with grand mansions, sparkling chandeliers, beautiful gowns, and endless afternoon tea. But beneath all that luxury was a world of strict routines, hidden responsibilities, and unwritten rules that governed nearly every hour of their lives, from the moment they opened their eyes each morning until the final candle was extinguished at night. Every detail was carefully planned. So dim the lights, close your eyes if you'd like, and allow yourself to drift gently into the quiet drawing rooms, peaceful gardens, and softly lit hallways of 19th-century Britain as we uncover the surprisingly busy and fascinating daily life of a wealthy Victorian woman. Rich Victorian women often appeared to lead lives of effortless luxury, surrounded by elegant furniture, sparkling chandeliers, carefully tended gardens, and servants who handled nearly every practical task. From a distance, it may seem that they spent their days doing very little beyond drinking tea and attending lavish parties. Yet the reality was far more structured, complicated, and surprisingly exhausting in its own quiet way. Their world revolved around strict expectations, endless routines, invisible social rules, and the constant pressure to present an image of perfection. Every hour of the day was shaped by customs that defined what a respectable lady should wear, say, think, and even feel. While wealth spared them from physical labour, it also trapped many within a carefully constructed performance that rarely allowed genuine freedom. So, settle in as we wander through a typical day in the life of a wealthy Victorian woman, where luxury and restriction existed side by side, and where appearances often mattered far more than reality. The day usually began earlier than many people imagine. Although there was no need to rush into kitchens or workshops, respectable women were expected to rise at a sensible hour, often between 7 and 8 in the morning. Their bedrooms were spacious and richly decorated, but they were rarely private spaces in the modern sense. A lady's maid often entered shortly after waking to help with washing, dressing, and arranging elaborate hairstyles. Running water was still uncommon in many grand houses, so basins filled with warm water were brought by servants. Bathing every day was not yet a universal habit, though careful washing of the face, hands, and upper body was considered essential. Personal cleanliness was increasingly valued throughout the 19th century, especially among the upper classes, who wished to distinguish themselves through refinement and proper hygiene. Victorian fashion demanded multiple layers of clothing. A woman might begin with undergarments, stockings, corsets, tightened firmly around the waist, petticoats, bustle supports in later decades, and finally, an elegant dress chosen, according to the time of day and planned activities. Jewellery, gloves, ribbons, lace collars, and carefully selected shoes completed the appearance. Hairstyles required pins, brushes, and often the assistance of the maid for nearly an hour. Every detail communicated wealth, respectability, and social standing. Wearing the wrong fabric at the wrong hour, or appearing with untidy hair could attract quiet criticism from other members of polite society. Breakfast was usually a relatively calm meal compared with dinner. Family members gathered in a comfortable morning room, where they enjoyed tea, coffee, eggs, bread, preserves, fruit, fish, or porridge. Depending upon household preferences, newspapers were often available, though political discussions remained largely dominated by men. Women frequently read serialized novels, fashion journals, religious literature, travel accounts, and magazines devoted to household management. Reading was considered an important accomplishment, provided the material was viewed as respectable and morally uplifting. Once breakfast ended, The morning became one of the busiest parts of the day. Contrary to the stereotype that servants managed everything without supervision, wealthy women often oversaw the domestic staff. In large country houses, there could be dozens of servants, including cooks, housemaids, kitchen maids, footmen, gardeners, coachmen, laundry workers, nursery staff, and butlers. Although the housekeeper managed many practical details, the lady of the house still made important decisions. She approved menus for formal dinners, discussed guest accommodations, reviewed household accounts, selected flowers for entertaining, inspected linens, planned purchases, and ensured that standards of cleanliness reflected the family status. Managing a great estate resembled directing a small business, although much of the labour remained invisible because servants carried out the physical work. Letters occupied a remarkable portion of every day. Victorian society depended heavily upon handwritten correspondence. Invitations, thank you notes, family updates, charitable requests, condolences, introductions, and social arrangements all required carefully composed letters, written according to strict etiquette. A wealthy woman might spend an hour or more at her writing desk using fine stationery, sealing wax, and elegant handwriting. Every phrase carried meaning, and mistakes in etiquette could damage valuable relationships. Maintaining social connections through correspondence formed one of the essential duties of upper-class life. Music and artistic accomplishments were also expected. Many women practiced the piano daily, not necessarily because they dreamed of becoming professional musicians, but because musical ability demonstrated refinement. Singing, watercolor painting, embroidery, flower arranging, and foreign languages occupied much of the late morning. French was particularly fashionable among educated ladies, while Italian music enjoyed considerable admiration. These accomplishments were carefully cultivated because they enhanced marriage prospects and reflected the family's educational standards. However, pursuing art too seriously sometimes invited criticism, since society preferred women to appear naturally talented rather than openly ambitious. Charitable work filled another significant part of respectable life. Wealthy Victorian women frequently visited orphanages, hospitals, schools, churches, and organisations supporting poor families. They organised clothing drives, sewing circles, church bazaars, and fundraising events. Although modern observers may question the effectiveness or motivations behind some charitable efforts, philanthropy became one of the few socially approved ways for upper-class women to exercise leadership outside the home. Through charitable organisations, some women gradually developed administrative skills, financial knowledge, and public influence that later contributed to campaigns for education and social reform. By late morning or early afternoon came one of the most recognisable customs of Victorian high society. Making calls, ladies climbed into elegant horse-drawn carriages and visited friends, relatives, or acquaintances according to carefully observed schedules. Calling cards bearing their names were left even if the host was absent. The length of each visit was precisely judged. Staying too briefly suggested indifference, while lingering too long risked becoming an inconvenience. Entire books explained the correct etiquette for social calls, emphasizing proper conversation, polite behavior, and graceful departures. These visits strengthened social networks, arranged future events, and quietly assessed the reputations of other families. Lunch, often called luncheon, was lighter than dinner, but still served with considerable elegance. Afterward, weather permitting, many women enjoyed walks through landscaped gardens or public parks. Exercise was considered beneficial, though vigorous physical activity remained controversial for respectable ladies. Gentle walking, croquet, lawn tennis in later decades, horseback riding for some families, or boating during holidays offered acceptable recreation. Doctors increasingly encouraged fresh air, believing it promoted good health and prevented nervous disorders. Afternoon tea gradually became one of the defining rituals of Victorian life. Fine porcelain cups, delicate sandwiches, cakes, scones, preserves, and conversation created an atmosphere that balanced relaxation with careful social performance. Tea gatherings provided opportunities to exchange news, discuss literature, display fashionable clothing, introduce eligible young people, and reinforce friendships. Yet even here, invisible rules governed behaviour. Conversation avoided excessively controversial subjects. Laughter remained controlled, and every gesture reflected expectations of gentility. Preparing for evening activities required changing clothes once again. Victorian etiquette distinguished sharply between morning dress, afternoon attire, visiting clothes, riding habits, and formal evening gowns. Before dinner, women often spent additional time with their maids arranging fresh hairstyles, replacing jewellery, adjusting gloves, and selecting fans or shawls appropriate for the occasion. The amount of preparation reflected the importance placed upon appearance as a public expression of family honour. Dinner represented the social highlight of many households. Wealthy families frequently served multiple courses over several hours. Guests discussed literature, travel, scientific discoveries, politics, colonial affairs, music, and recent events. Although women were generally expected to remain polite, rather than dominate conversations, fine silverware, crystal glasses, embroidered tablecloths, and elaborate floral arrangements displayed prosperity. Behind every elegant meal stood an army of servants working unseen below stairs to ensure flawless service. Following dinner, entertainment varied according to the season and location. Some evenings featured chamber music performed by family members or visiting musicians. Others included card games, poetry readings, amateur theatricals, dancing, or lively conversations in beautifully furnished drawing rooms. During the London social season, wealthy families attended balls, concerts, operas, theatre performances, exhibitions, and royal events. Debutantes entering society experienced months filled with receptions, dances, and introductions designed to secure advantageous marriages. These glamorous occasions required immense preparation and carried enormous social pressure. For young women who had not yet married, life followed an even more carefully managed path. From childhood onward, daughters of wealthy families were raised with one ultimate goal in mind: becoming accomplished ladies capable of making respectable marriages. Their education reflected this purpose. Rather than preparing them for careers or universities, lessons focused on subjects believed to improve their elegance and conversation. A typical day included French vocabulary, piano practice, singing, drawing, watercolour painting, embroidery, geography, history, scripture, dancing, and proper handwriting. Mathematics rarely extended beyond practical household accounts, while scientific subjects were often considered unnecessary unless presented as polite hobbies. Every accomplishment was designed to make a young woman appear cultured without seeming overly intellectual, because society often viewed excessive academic ambition as unfeminine. When daughters reached their late teenage years, preparations for entering society became increasingly serious. Their wardrobes expanded dramatically, with carefully chosen gowns suitable for morning visits, afternoon teas, garden parties, formal dinners, concerts, and magnificent evening balls. Mothers devoted enormous energy to coaching daughters in conversation, posture, manners, and dancing. They learned how to enter a room gracefully, curtsy correctly, greet guests of different social ranks, accept compliments modestly, and avoid controversial topics during conversation. Every detail mattered, because the social season represented an opportunity to meet suitable husbands under the careful supervision of families. Balls themselves were among the most exhausting events in Victorian society. Although remembered today as glamorous evenings filled with elegant dancing beneath glittering chandeliers, they demanded remarkable stamina. Preparations began hours before guests arrived. Hair was styled into elaborate arrangements, decorated with pearls, flowers, feathers, or jeweled combs. Dresses required careful fastening by maids. Gloves had to remain spotless, slippers perfectly fitted, and jewelry selected to complement rather than overwhelm the outfit. Once the evening began, women danced repeatedly, greeted dozens of acquaintances, maintained lively conversations, remembered complicated introductions, and followed strict etiquette, governing every interaction between unmarried men and women. Many balls continued until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, before exhausted guests finally returned home. The famous London season represented the absolute peak of fashionable life for Britain's wealthiest families. For several months each year, aristocrats left their country estates and moved into elegant London residences to participate in an endless calendar of social events: royal receptions, charity galas, horse races, concerts, art exhibitions, garden parties, dinners, operas, and exclusive balls filled nearly every evening. Invitations became valuable symbols of social importance. Families competed quietly for favourable introductions and prestigious connections. While the season undoubtedly provided excitement, it also demanded tremendous financial resources and relentless attention to appearances. Opera evenings deserve special mention, because attending the opera was often as much about seeing other people as watching the performance itself. Elegant opera houses became showcases of wealth, fashion, and influence. Ladies wore magnificent gowns adorned with expensive jewellery, while occupying carefully selected boxes that allowed others to admire them. Conversations during intervals frequently centered upon recent engagements, political developments, literary trends, or the latest Paris fashions. The performance itself shared attention with the elaborate social display taking place throughout the auditorium. Hosting guests placed another layer of responsibility upon wealthy women. Planning even a relatively modest dinner party required days of preparation. Guest lists had to balance personalities, family connections, social rank, and political opinions. Seating arrangements demanded careful thought, because placing 2 incompatible guests beside one another risked creating awkward silence throughout the meal. Menus required consultation with cooks. Flowers needed arranging, silver polished, wine selected, servants instructed, bedrooms prepared for overnight visitors, and entertainment organized for after dinner. A successful hostess made these complicated arrangements appear effortless, despite the enormous coordination taking place behind the scenes. Country house visits could last several days or even weeks. Guests followed carefully structured routines, including breakfast at designated hours, morning walks, horseback riding, hunting for gentlemen, croquet matches, afternoon tea, formal dinners, music performances, card games, and leisurely conversations around fireplaces. Although these visits seemed relaxing, everyone remained aware of proper etiquette. Arriving late for meals, dressing inappropriately, dominating conversations, or ignoring social customs could leave lasting impressions among influential families. Young unmarried women often found these gatherings particularly significant because they provided opportunities to meet potential husbands in respectable surroundings. Needlework occupied countless quiet hours throughout Victorian life. Embroidery, lace-making, sewing, and decorative stitching were considered appropriate accomplishments, demonstrating patience, skill, and refinement. Wealthy women produced elaborate cushions, tablecloths, wall hangings, clothing decorations, and gifts for relatives or charitable organizations. These activities also served practical purposes during long afternoons, when polite conversation alone might not occupy everyone's attention. Sitting together while working on embroidery allowed women to exchange news, discuss books, and strengthen friendships without appearing idle. Many affluent women developed impressive collections reflecting their personal interests. Some gathered rare botanical illustrations, antique porcelain, shells collected during seaside holidays, exotic plants imported from distant colonies, pressed flowers, coins, or beautifully bound books. Display cabinets filled with carefully arranged objects became conversation pieces for visitors. Collecting allowed women to express curiosity about the wider world, while remaining within the boundaries of respectable feminine interests. In some cases, these collections grew surprisingly scholarly, contributing to museums or scientific societies, despite limited public recognition. Photography gradually entered wealthy households during the later Victorian period, introducing an entirely new form of family memory. Sitting for portraits remained a lengthy process requiring extraordinary patience. Subjects often held perfectly still for extended periods. While photographers adjusted equipment and lighting, family albums soon filled with carefully posed images, documenting weddings, holidays, children, pets, servants, and country estates. Owning photographs of distant relatives also strengthened family connections across Britain and the expanding empire. Weather influenced daily routines far more than it does today. Heavy rain could postpone social calls because muddy roads complicated carriage travel. Thick fog occasionally blanketed London, reducing visibility so dramatically that afternoon visits were cancelled. During winter, shorter daylight hours encouraged families to spend longer evenings, indoors reading, playing music, or entertaining guests beside warm fireplaces. Summer brought garden parties, boating excursions, picnics, flower shows, and outdoor concerts that celebrated the beauty of carefully maintained landscapes. Christmas became an increasingly important family celebration during the Victorian era. Wealthy households transformed into scenes of remarkable activity. Evergreen decorations filled hallways, candles illuminated Christmas trees, cooks prepared magnificent feasts, musicians entertained guests, and children eagerly anticipated beautifully wrapped presents. Charitable giving also intensified during the festive season, with affluent families distributing food, clothing, and gifts to poorer communities. Many traditions still associated with Christmas today became popular during this period, making the holiday one of the year's happiest occasions. Even illness or pregnancy rarely removed wealthy women entirely from their social responsibilities. Visitors arrived to express concern, correspondence continued, household decisions required approval, and charitable organizations expected guidance. Recovering mothers often remained confined for extended periods, according to contemporary medical advice. Yet family management rarely paused completely. Personal comfort existed, thanks to attentive servants and spacious homes. But expectations surrounding duty remained remarkably persistent. Pets played a surprisingly important role in many affluent households. Small dogs lounged in drawing rooms, songbirds filled elegant cages, horses represented both transportation and recreation, while occasionally more unusual animals appeared as exotic curiosities collected during imperial travels. Caring for beloved pets provided companionship and emotional comfort within otherwise formal domestic environments. Portraits frequently included favorite dogs sitting proudly beside elegantly dressed owners, emphasizing the affection many families felt toward their animals. As the 19th century drew toward its close, subtle but significant changes slowly entered the lives of wealthy women. Bicycles offered unprecedented personal mobility. Typewriters introduced new opportunities for office work beyond elite households. One of the least visible but most important parts of a wealthy Victorian woman's life was the endless art of waiting. Modern life often values speed and efficiency, but Victorian society moved according to a much slower rhythm. Letters could take days to arrive, invitations were delivered by hand, travel depended upon horses or steam trains, and important decisions unfolded over weeks rather than hours. As a result, many afternoons contained long periods where women simply waited. They waited for visitors to arrive, for servants to complete preparations, for husbands returning from business or parliament, for children coming home from lessons, for the evening meal, or for replies to carefully written correspondence. These quiet hours were filled with reading, sewing, sketching, practicing music, arranging flowers, or simply gazing through large windows overlooking gardens and tree-lined driveways. To modern eyes, this might appear uneventful, but for Victorian women, these peaceful intervals formed an ordinary part of daily existence. Conversation itself was considered a skill worthy of years of practice. Wealthy women were expected to speak intelligently without appearing argumentative, remain informed without seeming boastful, and entertain guests without drawing excessive attention to themselves. They learned how to guide discussions gently from one subject to another, avoiding religion, controversial politics, personal finances, or anything considered impolite. Instead, conversations drifted comfortably through literature, travel, music, gardening, architecture, charitable work, recent exhibitions, family news, weather, and the latest fashions, remembering names, family connections, and previous conversations demonstrated both intelligence and good breeding. A graceful conversationalist could become highly respected, even without holding any official position in society. Birthdays, anniversaries, engagements, and weddings generated weeks of careful preparation. Wealthy women supervised invitations, written in elegant handwriting, selected suitable gifts, planned decorations, coordinated musicians, arranged elaborate meals, and ensured visiting relatives received comfortable accommodations. Floral arrangements alone could require extensive planning, with different flowers carrying symbolic meanings understood by many Victorians. White lilies suggested purity, roses represented affection, violets symbolized modesty, and forget me knots expressed faithful remembrance. Choosing the correct flowers became another subtle expression of refinement. Mourning occupied a surprisingly large place in Victorian society because death occurred far more frequently than it does today. Disease, limited medical knowledge, and shorter life expectancies meant many families experienced repeated losses. Wealthy women observed detailed mourning customs that governed clothing, jewelry, social activities, and even acceptable conversation. Black dresses became mandatory for extended periods, following the death of close relatives. Bright colours, festive entertainments, and elaborate jewellery were temporarily abandoned in favour of modest appearance and quiet dignity. Widows sometimes remained in full mourning for years, while even distant family losses required carefully observed changes in dress. These customs reflected genuine grief, but also reinforced social expectations surrounding respect and remembrance. Many ladies developed deep interests in botany, one of the few scientific fields widely considered appropriate for women. Collecting wildflowers, identifying plants, pressing specimens into albums, and cultivating exotic flowers became fashionable pursuits. Conservatories attached to grand country houses displayed orchids, ferns, palms, and tropical plants collected from distant parts of the British Empire. Botanical illustration demanded remarkable precision, combining artistic talent with careful observation. Although few women received formal scientific recognition, many quietly contributed valuable knowledge through meticulous collections and correspondence with professional botanists. The arrival of new technology often fascinated wealthy households. The spread of railways dramatically reduced travel times, allowing families to visit friends living hundreds of miles away with unprecedented ease. Telegraph messages gradually supplemented handwritten letters for urgent communication. Gas lighting transformed evening entertainment by making brightly illuminated drawing rooms possible long after sunset. Toward the end of the Victorian era, electricity began appearing in some of the grandest homes, astonishing guests accustomed to candles and oil lamps. Wealthy women witnessed these technological revolutions firsthand, adapting household routines as each innovation slowly entered daily life. Libraries within country houses often became favorite retreats during rainy afternoons. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves surrounded comfortable chairs positioned beside large windows or fireplaces. Here women escaped into novels describing distant adventures, biographies of remarkable historical figures, collections of poetry, travel accounts from explorers, and illustrated books filled with engravings of ancient ruins or foreign landscapes. Reading aloud remained especially popular among families. One person would read while others embroidered, sketched, or quietly listened, allowing everyone to enjoy literature together in an atmosphere of peaceful companionship. Artists, writers, musicians, and scholars occasionally visited aristocratic homes as honored guests. Wealthy families often acted as patrons, providing financial support or introducing talented individuals to influential social circles. Dinner conversations with famous authors or celebrated painters offered intellectual excitement beyond ordinary social gatherings. Some women became enthusiastic supporters of museums, galleries, orchestras, and educational institutions, believing that encouraging culture reflected both generosity and refinement. Through patronage, they quietly shaped the artistic and intellectual life of Victorian Britain. Health resorts gained enormous popularity among affluent families. During the 19th century, doctors frequently recommended visits to seaside towns or mineral springs for everything from fatigue to digestive complaints. Resorts such as Bath, Brighton, Harrogate, and Buxton welcomed wealthy visitors seeking fresh air, therapeutic waters, and gentle recreation. Days at these destinations revolved around leisurely walks along promenades, carefully timed meals, concerts, reading, polite conversation, and supervised bathing. Although many treatments possessed little scientific value, the peaceful surroundings often provided genuine relaxation from demanding social schedules. Household pets frequently occupied privileged positions within wealthy homes. Elegant spaniels slept beside fireplaces, cats wandered through libraries, parrots entertained guests with amusing phrases, and horses remained treasured companions rather than mere transportation. Children formed especially close bonds with family animals, while adults often commissioned painted portraits, including beloved pets. Caring for these companions offered moments of warmth and affection within otherwise formal domestic routines. Winter evenings created a particularly distinctive atmosphere inside grand Victorian houses. Thick curtains shut out cold winds, while coal fires crackled in ornate fireplaces. Candlelight and gas lamps cast warm reflections across polished furniture, silver ornaments, and richly patterned carpets. Families gathered around large tables to complete puzzles, play chess, write letters, or work on embroidery, while music drifted softly from the piano in the next room. Outside, darkness settled over snow, covered gardens, or frost covered lawns, while inside conversation continued comfortably late into the evening. These quieter months often strengthened family relationships because travel became less frequent and more time was spent together indoors. Other servants managed cleaning, cooking, laundry, and countless practical tasks. Wealthy women still possessed intimate knowledge of how a large household functioned. They understood which linens belonged in particular guest rooms, which wines suited formal dinners, how many candles would be needed for evening entertainments, where valuable china should be stored, and which servants possessed special talents. Experienced hostesses anticipated problems before they appeared. If unexpected guests arrived, additional bedrooms could be prepared almost immediately. If weather disrupted outdoor celebrations, drawing rooms were rearranged for indoor entertainment. Such organizational ability rarely received public praise. Yet it formed the foundation of successful upper-class households. As newspapers expanded throughout the 19th century, many affluent women became increasingly aware of events occurring beyond their immediate social circles. Reports described archaeological discoveries in Egypt, expeditions across Africa, engineering marvels, parliamentary debates, scientific breakthroughs, royal ceremonies, and conflicts across Europe and the British Empire. While women often lacked direct political influence, they discussed these developments within families and gradually formed opinions on education, poverty, healthcare, and social reform. Their awareness of the wider world steadily expanded alongside improvements in communication and publishing. Some evenings concluded with private diary writing, an activity cherished by many Victorian women. Diaries preserved thoughts that could never be spoken publicly. They recorded joyful family celebrations, disappointments, anxieties, hopes, observations about society, amusing incidents, travel experiences, and reflections upon changing times. As the afternoon sun slowly shifted across polished wooden floors and filtered through heavy velvet curtains, another quieter part of a wealthy Victorian woman's routine often began. These were the hours devoted not to grand social events, but to the countless little responsibilities that kept an aristocratic household running smoothly. She might sit at an elegant writing table reviewing lists prepared by the butler or housekeeper, confirming deliveries expected later in the week, approving menus for upcoming dinners, or discussing repairs needed somewhere on the estate. A leaking roof on the stable, damaged wallpaper in a guest room, new curtains for the library, or additional blankets for the servants' quarters could all require her attention. Although she rarely carried out these tasks herself, she was expected to notice every detail and ensure that the household reflected the dignity of the family name. Many large estates also produced their own food, creating another layer of management. Gardens supplied vegetables and herbs, orchards produced fruit, dairy cows provided milk, and gamekeepers managed hunting grounds. The lady of the house often took an interest in these activities, especially when planning meals or organizing seasonal celebrations. During harvest time, some wealthy families even hosted festivals for estate workers, distributing food, prizes, or small gifts as gestures of goodwill. While these events reinforced the social hierarchy, they also strengthened the sense of community that many country estates depended upon. Afternoons sometimes brought unexpected visitors who arrived without formal invitations, as spontaneous calling remained perfectly acceptable within certain hours. A carriage rolling up the long driveway signalled that another round of polite conversation was about to begin. Servants hurried to announce the guests. Refreshments were prepared almost automatically, and the drawing room quickly transformed into a stage for elegant hospitality. Conversations remained light and pleasant. News of recent travels, engagements, births, charitable projects, or fashionable exhibitions circulated effortlessly between cups of tea. Every guest was expected to leave feeling warmly received, regardless of whether the visit lasted 15 minutes or 2 hours. Weather often dictated the pace of these gatherings. On bright summer afternoons, conversations moved outdoors onto terraces, overlooking carefully landscaped gardens. Ladies carried parasols to protect their complexions from the sun, as pale skin remained a symbol of refinement and leisure. Garden paths wound through colourful flower beds. Ornamental lakes reflected the surrounding trees, and distant fountains provided a gentle background sound. Guests admired rare roses, newly planted shrubs, or exotic flowers recently imported from distant parts of the empire. Such walks appeared leisurely, yet they also served as opportunities to demonstrate the beauty and prosperity of the estate. Rainy days created a completely different atmosphere. Instead of strolling through gardens, families gathered indoors around fireplaces where conversation blended with music and reading. A daughter might practice a Beethoven sonata while her mother embroidered beside the window. Another family member quietly read the latest serialized novel, pausing occasionally to share an amusing passage aloud. Outside, rain tapped softly against tall windows, while inside the house remained warm, orderly, and remarkably peaceful. These slow afternoons captured a sense of calm that many Victorian families deeply valued. Correspondence never truly ended. Even after completing the morning's letters, additional invitations, thank you notes or requests frequently arrived before evening. Etiquette required prompt replies, especially among the upper classes where delayed correspondence could unintentionally cause offence. Some women became remarkably skilled writers, producing letters filled with warmth, humour, and graceful observations. Collections of Victorian correspondence reveal friendships maintained across decades through thousands of handwritten pages, long before telephones made conversation instantaneous. Many wealthy women also devoted time to preserving family history. They organized albums containing portraits of relatives, carefully labeled photographs, and maintained records of births, marriages, and important events. Family Bibles often contained handwritten genealogies, stretching back several generations. Portrait galleries lining the walls of great houses reminded each generation of the family's heritage, reinforcing the belief that they were custodians of a long tradition rather than merely owners of comfortable homes. This sense of continuity shaped many of their daily decisions. Preparing daughters for adult life remained an ongoing responsibility. Mothers observed their daughters' behavior closely, gently correcting posture, speech, table manners, and conversation whenever necessary. Young ladies practiced entering rooms gracefully, pouring tea correctly, introducing guests, and writing formal invitations. Dancing lessons continued regularly because confidence in the ballroom reflected careful upbringing. Mothers also offered discreet advice about choosing friends wisely, avoiding gossip, and maintaining composure even during uncomfortable situations. These lessons were intended to prepare daughters for the demanding social world they would soon enter themselves. Relationships between sisters often became especially important within wealthy households. They shared bedrooms during childhood, attended lessons together, practiced music side by side, exchanged books, embroidered the same projects, and attended social events as companions. Older sisters frequently guided younger ones through the confusing rules of society, offering practical advice unavailable in etiquette manuals. Lifelong friendships often developed within these family relationships, providing emotional support that formal Victorian society sometimes lacked. The household clock quietly governed almost everything. Meals occurred at precise hours. Servants followed carefully planned schedules. Visitors arrived within acceptable calling times, and evening entertainment unfolded according to established routines. Punctuality demonstrated respectability. Arriving late to dinner inconvenienced both hosts and servants. Missing church services reflected poorly upon the family. Even afternoon tea followed remarkably consistent timing. The rhythm of the household resembled a carefully conducted orchestra, with everyone understanding their place within the daily performance. Animals on country estates added life to the otherwise orderly environment. Horses remained essential companions, not only for transportation, but also for recreation. Skilled horsewomen enjoyed supervised rides across fields and woodland paths, particularly during pleasant weather. Stables themselves became impressive buildings, housing valuable horses cared for by experienced grooms. Hunting dogs, though primarily associated with gentlemen's sporting activities, often became beloved family companions as well. Children delighted in visiting the stables, feeding ponies, or watching young foals grow during the spring. Seasonal changes dramatically altered household routines. Spring filled conservatories with blossoms and inspired outdoor gatherings after the long winter months. Summer encouraged picnics, boating excursions, and garden parties, stretching late into the evening. Autumn brought harvest celebrations, shooting parties for gentlemen, and preparations for colder weather. Winter shifted family life indoors, where blazing fireplaces, candlelight, and music created an atmosphere of warmth against the darkness outside. Each season carried its own traditions, menus, decorations, and social calendar, ensuring that life never felt entirely repetitive despite its structured nature. Household celebrations extended beyond major holidays. Birthdays were marked with carefully chosen gifts, favorite meals, and family gatherings. Wedding anniversaries offered opportunities to host intimate dinners or invite close friends for music and conversation. Christenings, engagements, graduations, and military promotions all provided reasons to gather relatives under one roof. These occasions strengthened family ties, while reinforcing the importance Victorians placed upon tradition and continuity. The sounds inside a wealthy Victorian house formed a world very different from today. Instead of televisions, mobile phones, or electronic devices, daily life unfolded against the ticking of grandfather clocks, the gentle crackling of fireplaces, distant piano practice, drifting through hallways, footsteps on polished staircases, carriage wheels crunching over gravel driveways, birds singing outside open windows, and the occasional ringing of servant bells summoning household staff. These familiar sounds created an atmosphere of quiet order, interrupted only by conversation or music. Even silence itself was appreciated rather than avoided. As darkness settled over the estate, servants moved through the house lighting lamps and drawing curtains against the night. Drawing rooms glowed with warm light, reflecting from polished furniture, gilded mirrors, and crystal chandeliers. Families assembled for one final period together before retiring. Some evenings included lively discussions about books recently read or places visited. Others remained peaceful, with each person absorbed in reading, needlework, or quiet reflection. Eventually, the household gradually dispersed. Candles accompanied each family member upstairs, and the great house slowly returned to silence. Looking beyond the luxurious dresses, glittering jewelry, and magnificent architecture reveals something far more human. Another aspect of a wealthy Victorian woman's life that often escapes modern attention was the enormous amount of time devoted to preparing for events that lasted only a few hours. A formal dinner party might begin at 7 in the evening, yet preparations could occupy the entire household from early morning. The cook planned numerous courses, gardeners selected fresh flowers, maids polished silver until it gleamed beneath candlelight. Footmen arranged chairs with mathematical precision, and the lady of the house moved quietly from room to room, ensuring that everything reflected perfect order. She inspected table decorations, confirmed the seating arrangement one final time, approved the placement of candles, and reviewed the evening's schedule with the butler. By the time guests finally arrived, hundreds of small decisions had already been made. Though the hostess was expected to greet everyone with a calm smile that suggested none of it required effort, hospitality was considered almost an art form. A successful hostess noticed details that most guests never consciously observed. She remembered which visitor preferred tea rather than coffee, which elderly relative needed a more comfortable chair, which friend disliked loud conversation, and which guests shared similar interests that might encourage lively discussion during dinner. She quietly introduced strangers who might enjoy meeting each other while gently preventing uncomfortable situations before they developed. The greatest compliment a Victorian hostess could receive was that an evening appeared to unfold naturally, even though every moment had been carefully planned. Food itself reflected changing fashions throughout the Victorian era. Wealthy households enjoyed remarkable variety compared to previous centuries. Imported spices, tropical fruits, chocolates, wines and teas arrived from across the expanding British Empire. Dinner tables displayed elaborate centerpieces surrounded by multiple courses, including soups, fish, roasted meats, vegetables, pastries, puddings, cheeses, and fresh fruit. Yet despite the abundance, respectable women were expected to eat modestly in public. Taking excessively large portions or appearing overly enthusiastic about food was considered inelegant. Grace and self-control remained more important than appetite. Even simple walks around the estate often carried hidden purposes. While enjoying fresh air, the lady of the house might inspect newly planted trees, observe repairs to garden walls, check progress on flower beds, or speak briefly with gardeners responsible for maintaining the grounds. She noticed whether gravel paths required attention after heavy rain, whether fountains functioned properly before an upcoming gathering, or whether climbing roses had reached the desired height along decorative arches. These observations allowed her to discuss improvements later with estate staff, without appearing overly involved in manual work. Many aristocratic homes contained conservatories filled with exotic plants collected from distant parts of the world. These glass houses created warm environments where orchids, palms, citrus trees, and tropical flowers flourished. Despite Britain's cool climate, walking through these fragrant spaces became a favourite afternoon pastime, particularly during winter when outdoor gardens lay dormant. The humid air, colourful blossoms, and unusual scents offered a striking contrast to the grey skies outside. Visitors often admired these collections, seeing them as symbols of both wealth and curiosity about the wider world. Education did not necessarily end after marriage. Although formal university opportunities remained largely unavailable, Many wealthy women continued teaching themselves throughout adulthood. They attended public lectures whenever considered socially appropriate, subscribed to literary magazines, collected scientific publications written for general audiences, and discussed new ideas within trusted circles of friends. Astronomy became especially fashionable because observing the night sky from private estates required little controversy. Some families even installed telescopes, allowing evenings to include quiet observations of the moon, planets, and stars. Music filled nearly every elegant household. Morning practice sessions developed technical skill, but evening performances created opportunities for shared enjoyment. Family members gathered around grand pianos, while daughters performed popular compositions by Mendelssohn, Chopin, Schubert, or Beethoven. Guests frequently contributed songs, violin performances, or duets, transforming drawing rooms into intimate concert halls. Applause remained polite, rather than enthusiastic, reflecting Victorian ideals of restraint. Musical talent brought admiration, provided it appeared graceful rather than professional. Books frequently sparked lively discussion among educated women. New novels, by celebrated authors, circulated rapidly through social circles, passed from one household to another after being carefully wrapped for protection. Reading groups occasionally formed among friends who met regularly to discuss recent publications. Historical biographies, travel narratives, collections of poetry, and moral essays generated thoughtful conversation during afternoon visits. Literature provided an acceptable avenue for intellectual engagement within a society that often discouraged women from participating directly in politics or academic life. Charitable committees became increasingly sophisticated as the century progressed. Rather than simply distributing food or clothing, many wealthy women helped organize schools, libraries, hospitals, orphanages, employment programs, and housing improvements. Meetings involved reviewing accounts, planning fundraising events, coordinating volunteers, and corresponding with local officials. These responsibilities demanded administrative ability, diplomacy, and financial awareness. While such work rarely challenged traditional gender expectations openly, it allowed many women to develop leadership skills that extended far beyond the drawing room. The Victorian fascination with collecting reached remarkable levels among affluent families. Cabinets displayed minerals, fossils, butterflies, seashells, coins, ancient pottery fragments, dried plants, and archaeological souvenirs brought home from European journeys. Each object carried a story, reminding its owner of a memorable holiday or an interesting scientific discovery. Guests examined these collections with genuine curiosity, often sharing knowledge about geography, history, or natural science. In this way, collecting became both entertainment and education. During long carriage journeys between country estates or visits to nearby towns, conversation unfolded at an unhurried pace. Unlike modern travel filled with digital distractions, carriage rides encouraged observation of the landscape. Rolling fields, grazing sheep, ancient churches, quiet villages, winding rivers, and distant woodlands passed slowly beyond the windows. Travellers commented upon changing weather, admired newly harvested fields, or discussed families living on neighbouring estates. Even travel itself became an opportunity for reflection rather than hurried movement. Laundry, though performed entirely by servants, remained one of the largest operations within great houses. Mountains of linens, towels, tablecloths, napkins, bedsheets, curtains, and clothing passed continuously through washrooms staffed by teams of workers. The mistress monitored the replacement of worn fabrics, approved purchases of fine linens, and ensured guest rooms always appeared immaculate. White linen represented cleanliness and prosperity, making its maintenance an unexpectedly important responsibility. Lighting transformed the mood of Victorian homes throughout the day. Morning sunlight illuminated drawing rooms through tall windows draped with lace curtains. Afternoon light softened as it filtered across polished furniture and richly coloured carpets. Evening introduced candles and gas lamps that cast warm golden reflections across mirrors, paintings, and crystal ornaments. Wealthy women paid close attention to this atmosphere, arranging furniture and decorative objects to create welcoming spaces suitable for conversation and relaxation. Privacy, however, was surprisingly limited despite living in enormous houses. Servants moved constantly through corridors. Guests arrived frequently. Relatives often stayed for extended visits, and social obligations left little opportunity for solitude. Moments alone in libraries, gardens, or private sitting rooms became precious opportunities for quiet thought. Some women treasured these peaceful intervals, using them to write diaries, read favourite books, practice sketching, or simply enjoy silence away from the expectations of society. As industrialization transformed Britain, many wealthy women observed enormous changes taking place beyond the walls of their estates. Railways connected distant cities. Factories expanded rapidly. Newspapers reported remarkable engineering achievements, and scientific discoveries challenged traditional beliefs. Although their own routines often remained conservative, they lived during one of history's most dramatic periods of technological and social change. Their conversations increasingly included subjects that would have astonished earlier generations, from photography and electricity to archaeology and evolutionary theory. Old age brought different responsibilities. Elderly ladies often withdrew from the busiest social events, allowing younger generations to host dinners and attend fashionable balls. Instead, they became respected family advisors whose experience guided children and grandchildren through important decisions. Beyond the elegant drawing rooms and perfectly arranged gardens, there was another responsibility that occupied the minds of many wealthy Victorian women almost every single day: preserving harmony within the household. Large country houses were like small villages under one roof. Dozens of servants worked together. Relatives arrived for extended visits. Children needed guidance. Elderly family members required attention, and guests expected flawless hospitality. While the butler managed the male servants and the housekeeper supervised the female staff, the mistress remained the quiet centre around which the entire household revolved. She rarely issued loud commands or dramatic speeches. Instead, her influence appeared through calm decisions, thoughtful planning, and an ability to solve problems before they became visible to anyone else. Disagreements among servants occasionally arose, just as they do in any workplace. A kitchen maid might argue with a scullery maid over responsibilities, or a young footman could disappoint the butler by neglecting an important duty. Although senior staff handled most disciplinary matters, particularly serious issues sometimes reached the lady of the house. She was expected to listen patiently, judge fairly, and preserve the smooth running of the household without creating unnecessary tension. Good employers gained loyal servants who remained with the family for decades, sometimes serving 3 generations under the same roof. Preparing the house for unexpected guests demanded remarkable flexibility. Telegraph messages were becoming more common by the late 19th century, but many visitors still arrived with only a day's notice or none at all. Within minutes of receiving news, guest bedrooms had to be aired, fresh flowers arranged, fireplaces prepared if the weather required warmth, towels laid out, and evening meals adjusted to accommodate additional people. The lady of the house quietly coordinated these preparations with experienced servants, making the sudden arrival appear entirely effortless. Guests were never meant to see the hurried activity taking place behind the scenes. Many wealthy women also developed an intimate knowledge of family recipes and household traditions passed down through generations. Although they rarely cooked daily meals themselves, they often preserved handwritten recipe books filled with favourite puddings, cakes, preserves, sauces, and festive dishes served during Christmas or important family celebrations. Some recipes included personal notes written by mothers or grandmothers decades earlier, turning ordinary cookbooks into treasured family heirlooms. During holidays, the mistress might supervise the preparation of these traditional meals to ensure they remained exactly as previous generations remembered them. Time spent with children became more relaxed as the 19th century progressed. Earlier Victorian families often maintained formal relationships between parents and children, but attitudes slowly softened. Wealthy mothers increasingly joined nursery games, accompanied children on walks through the gardens, listened to simple piano recitals, or read stories aloud during quiet evenings. Picture books, fairy tales, adventure stories, and historical legends became popular family entertainment, while nurses and governesses continued handling much of the daily childcare. Affectionate family moments gradually became more common than they had been earlier in the century. Portraits occupied a special place within aristocratic homes. Long hallways displayed generations of ancestors dressed in the fashions of their own eras, creating an almost continuous visual history of the family. Wealthy women often paused before these paintings while walking through the house, reflecting upon relatives they had known or stories passed down about those who had lived centuries earlier. Visitors admired these galleries, and children learned family history by asking questions about the faces watching silently from the walls. These portraits reminded everyone that they belonged to something larger than themselves. Weather could transform the mood of an entire estate within hours. A brilliant summer morning encouraged windows to be opened, allowing birdsong and the fragrance of blooming roses to drift through the rooms. Gentle breezes stirred lace curtains, while sunlight illuminated polished floors. By contrast, heavy autumn storms darkened the skies, encouraging everyone to gather around blazing fireplaces, where conversations became quieter and more intimate. Snowfall during winter created scenes of extraordinary beauty as white landscapes stretched beyond the windows, inviting children outdoors, while adults admired the peaceful silence from the warmth of the drawing room. Unsurprisingly important daily ritual involved flowers. Fresh arrangements appeared throughout wealthy homes, changing constantly with the seasons. Garden roses filled crystal vases during summer, while winter brought evergreen branches, holly, and carefully forced blossoms grown inside conservatories. The lady of the house often selected flowers personally, ensuring each room possessed its own character. Morning rooms received cheerful bouquets, dining tables displayed elegant centerpieces, and guest bedrooms welcomed visitors with simple but tasteful arrangements. Flowers brightened interiors, while quietly demonstrating the estate's prosperity and careful management. Reading newspapers together became increasingly common as literacy expanded. Although men often focused upon parliamentary debates, financial news, or international politics, women also followed reports describing archaeological discoveries, royal ceremonies, scientific achievements, famous court cases, and cultural events. Articles about distant expeditions fascinated many readers, allowing them to imagine deserts in Egypt, jungles in India, glaciers in Switzerland, or ancient temples newly uncovered by archaeologists. Such stories broadened horizons, far beyond the boundaries of country estates. Many afternoons included quiet moments devoted to simple observation. Sitting beside a large window, a wealthy woman might watch gardeners tending flower beds, children playing on the lawn, horses exercising in distant fields, or changing clouds drifting across the countryside. These peaceful intervals offered opportunities to reflect upon personal hopes, family concerns, or plans for future gatherings. Unlike today's constant flow of entertainment, Victorian life accepted silence as a natural companion rather than something requiring immediate distraction. The rhythm of domestic life became especially noticeable during evenings after guests had departed. Servants quietly cleared dining tables, extinguished unnecessary lamps, secured doors, and prepared the house for night. The bustle that had filled every corridor gradually faded until only the gentle ticking of clocks echoed through the hallways. Family members often lingered briefly beside the fire, discussing the success of the evening, laughing over amusing conversations, or planning tomorrow's activities. These unhurried moments allowed everyone to relax after maintaining perfect manners throughout hours of formal entertaining. Books borrowed from friends frequently circulated among neighbouring families. A particularly enjoyable novel might travel from one estate to another, accompanied by handwritten notes recommending favourite chapters or commenting upon memorable characters in this way. Literature became part of an ongoing conversation extending across entire social circles. The excitement surrounding a newly published novel resembled anticipation for a modern film release, with readers eagerly discussing unexpected endings or beloved protagonists during afternoon visits. As photography became increasingly affordable, wealthy families gradually replaced some painted portraits with photographic albums. Mothers carefully arranged these albums on drawing room tables, where visitors could admire images from holidays, weddings, christenings, and family gatherings. Looking through these collections became a pleasant afternoon activity, encouraging stories about childhood adventures, amusing mishaps, or memorable journeys across Europe. These photographs captured ordinary moments that earlier generations could preserve only through written descriptions. Although Victorian society valued formality, laughter certainly had its place. Family gatherings included humorous anecdotes, playful teasing among siblings, amusing observations about travel, and light-hearted games after dinner. Charades became especially popular, with guests silently acting out famous books, historical figures, or familiar expressions, while others guessed the answers. These performances often produced genuine laughter that echoed through drawing rooms otherwise associated with polite conversation and elegant restraint. Some wealthy women developed remarkable knowledge of architecture and interior decoration. They supervised renovations, selected wallpaper patterns, commissioned furniture, and arranged paintings to create harmonious interiors, reflecting both comfort and status. Every room served a particular purpose. Morning rooms welcomed informal family activities. Drawing rooms hosted guests. Libraries encouraged quiet reading. Dining rooms emphasized ceremony, and conservatories offered peaceful retreats surrounded by exotic plants. Balancing beauty with practicality required careful judgment developed over many years. Even seemingly ordinary activities like folding letters revealed Victorian attention to detail. Correspondence followed accepted conventions regarding paper quality, ink color, handwriting style, sealing wax, and methods of addressing envelopes. As the years passed, many wealthy Victorian women became the unofficial historians of their families. Long before digital photographs, cloud storage, or even widespread photography, preserving memories required deliberate effort. They carefully tied bundles of letters together with silk ribbons, pressed flowers collected during meaningful walks between the pages of favorite books, labeled portraits with names and dates, and stored invitations from memorable celebrations inside decorative boxes. Birth certificates, marriage announcements, newspaper clippings, and handwritten recipes accumulated inside cabinets and writing desks, creating private family archives that sometimes survived for generations. During quiet afternoons, they occasionally sorted through these collections, smiling at faded handwriting or recalling relatives who had long since passed away. Visitors often commented on how peaceful large country houses appeared, yet maintaining that peaceful atmosphere demanded constant attention. Fires had to be kept burning during cold weather, carpets protected from muddy boots, valuable furniture shielded from excessive sunlight, and delicate fabrics preserved against dust. Windows were opened at suitable times to allow fresh air inside before being closed again as evening temperatures dropped. Fresh flowers replaced those beginning to wilt. Books returned neatly to shelves after being borrowed, and drawing rooms restored to perfect order before the next day's visitors arrived. None of these details seemed remarkable individually, but together they created the elegant environment for which Victorian homes became famous. Many wealthy women enjoyed observing nature throughout the changing seasons. Spring brought excitement as crocuses, daffodils, and tulips emerged after winter. Songbirds returned to the gardens, lambs appeared in nearby fields, and fruit trees filled with delicate blossoms. Summer transformed lawns into places for picnics, lawn games, and afternoon reading beneath shady trees. Autumn covered pathways with golden leaves, while orchards produced apples and pears, destined for preserves and desserts. Winter wrapped the countryside in frost, encouraging families to gather around roaring fireplaces, while snow settled silently beyond the windows. These seasonal rhythms shaped everyday life far more deeply than modern urban living often allows. The arrival of guests from overseas frequently turned ordinary weeks into fascinating cultural exchanges. Britain maintained connections across Europe and throughout its vast empire, meaning visitors occasionally arrived with stories about distant countries unfamiliar to most people. Conversations wandered through descriptions of Egyptian pyramids, Alpine villages, Indian palaces, Mediterranean ports, or tropical islands reached after long sea voyages. Maps were unfolded across tables. Illustrated travel books passed from hand to hand, and curious children listened with wide-eyed fascination. Such evenings allowed women who rarely travelled great distances themselves to experience the wider world through the experiences of trusted friends. Libraries within aristocratic homes served purposes beyond reading alone. They became places where family members quietly escaped the demands of constant social interaction. A comfortable chair beside the fire, surrounded by leather, bound volumes, and the gentle scent of polished wood, offered welcome solitude after busy days filled with visitors. Some women spent hours studying historical biographies, comparing ancient civilizations, or exploring beautifully illustrated books describing archaeological discoveries. Others simply enjoyed the silence, interrupted only by the turning of pages or the distant ticking of a clock. somewhere in the hallway. Tea remained much more than a drink. Preparing afternoon tea involved selecting porcelain cups, arranging embroidered tablecloths, choosing cakes and sandwiches, polishing silver teaspoons, and ensuring every detail reflected good taste. The ritual itself encouraged conversation to slow naturally. Guests lingered comfortably over steaming cups while discussing literature, family news, charitable projects, or recent concerts. Unlike formal dinners, governed by elaborate etiquette afternoon, tea often created a gentler atmosphere where genuine friendships flourished through repeated visits over many years. The education of servants also concerned thoughtful mistresses. Younger maids entering service frequently arrived with little experience, requiring patient instruction before mastering household routines. Experienced ladies encouraged reliable servants to improve their reading, writing, or practical skills whenever opportunities arose. Some quietly assisted former servants wishing to marry or establish small businesses after leaving domestic service. These acts of generosity rarely attracted public attention, but strengthened loyalty within households, where many employees remained for decades. Although Victorian society valued emotional restraint, moments of deep affection appeared regularly within family life. Grandparents delighted in the laughter of visiting grandchildren, exploring gardens, or playing simple games on nursery floors. Sisters exchanged thoughtful birthday gifts, accompanied by heartfelt letters. Mothers waited anxiously for sons serving overseas or studying far from home, eagerly anticipating every letter announcing safe arrival or academic success. Fathers returning after weeks of travel found children running eagerly to greet them at the entrance hall. Behind the formal etiquette visible to outsiders existed countless ordinary expressions of love that rarely appeared in official portraits, yet formed the emotional heart of many families. Even decorating the home reflected changing tastes throughout the century. Wallpapers evolved from simple patterns to richly coloured floral designs inspired by nature. Heavy curtains framed tall windows, while embroidered cushions softened polished wooden furniture. Mantelpieces displayed clocks, porcelain figurines, family photographs, and carefully chosen ornaments collected during European holidays. Every room balanced comfort with elegance, creating spaces where visitors felt welcomed without forgetting the family's social standing. Rainy evenings often inspired storytelling rather than music. Elderly relatives shared tales about childhood adventures before the railway age, memorable winters, royal celebrations, unusual travellers who had visited the estate, or amusing family mishaps passed down through generations. Younger listeners absorbed these stories eagerly, preserving traditions that otherwise might have disappeared. In this way, oral history complemented written diaries and family albums, allowing memories to survive long after those who experienced them had gone. The changing fashions of each decade brought endless discussion among fashionable women. Sleeves expanded dramatically before shrinking again. Skirts widened with enormous crinolines, before bustles shifted volume toward the back. Hat styles changed repeatedly, as did hairstyles, gloves, shoes, and jewelry. Fashion magazines illustrated the newest trends arriving from Paris, encouraging lively debate about which designs suited particular occasions. Yet despite constant change, elegance remained more important than extravagance. A tasteful appearance reflected judgment and refinement rather than mere wealth. The soundscape of an evening gathering differed remarkably from modern entertainment. Without recorded music, every melody came from human voices or live instruments. Friends sang familiar songs around the piano. Daughters performed carefully practiced pieces, and guests occasionally joined together in cheerful choruses. Conversation paused respectfully during performances before resuming afterward with renewed warmth. Music became something shared rather than consumed, strengthening friendships through participation instead of passive listening. As candlelight gradually gave way to gas lamps, and eventually electricity in some of the grandest homes, older women witnessed astonishing changes within a single lifetime. Many had been born when journeys depended almost entirely upon horses, and handwritten letters represented the fastest practical communication. By old age, they had seen railways cross the countryside, telegraph wires connect cities, photography preserve faces with remarkable accuracy, and electric lights begin replacing candles. Around drawing room fireplaces, they often reflected upon these extraordinary transformations, marveling at how quickly the world had changed since their own childhoods. Old age itself often brought a quieter but deeply respected role. Elderly ladies no longer hurried between social engagements with the same energy as before. Yet younger generations increasingly relied upon their wisdom. They advised newly married daughters managing households for the first time, comforted grandchildren facing disappointments, settled minor family disagreements with calm authority, and preserved traditions that linked one generation to the next. Their experience transformed them into living repositories of family memory, respected not for fashionable appearance, but for judgment earned over decades of careful observation. Looking closely at these daily routines reveals something unexpected. Luxury did not eliminate work, it simply changed its nature. Instead of washing clothes, preparing meals, or laboring in factories, wealthy Victorian women devoted their time to organization, hospitality, education, correspondence, philanthropy, family leadership, and preserving the cultural traditions expected of their social class. Their responsibilities demanded patience rather than physical strength, diplomacy rather than authority, and consistency rather than excitement. As evening settled over the countryside, and the final visitors departed, the great houses of Victorian Britain often became wonderfully quiet. Servants moved almost silently through long corridors, collecting empty teacups, extinguishing lamps in unused rooms, and preparing the house for another peaceful night. The sounds that remained were gentle and familiar, the steady ticking of tall grandfather clocks, the soft crackle of coal fires, an occasional gust of wind brushing against the windows, or the distant footsteps of someone crossing an upstairs hallway. For many wealthy women, these peaceful hours were among the few moments when the constant demands of hospitality and social life finally eased. Some ladies chose to spend these quieter evenings writing in personal journals. Unlike formal letters, which required careful wording and proper etiquette, diaries allowed complete honesty. Here they recorded ordinary moments that might otherwise disappear forever. They described the arrival of spring flowers, amusing conversations during afternoon tea, worries about a sick child, excitement over an upcoming journey, admiration for a beautiful concert, or disappointment after an uncomfortable social gathering. Reading surviving Victorian diaries today reveals remarkably familiar emotions. Despite living in another century, these women laughed at small mistakes, worried about loved ones, celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and wondered what the future might bring. The management of household traditions also rested heavily upon their shoulders. Every family possessed customs repeated year after year. Perhaps Christmas dinner always included a particular pudding prepared from a grandmother's handwritten recipe. Perhaps birthdays began with breakfast served in bed, followed by small gifts arranged carefully upon silver trays. Certain songs might always be played after dinner, while favourite stories were told beside the fire each winter. Wealthy Victorian women quietly protected these traditions, understanding that familiar routines gave families a comforting sense of identity, even as the outside world changed rapidly. Many large homes also contained schoolrooms where younger children spent much of their day with governesses. Although mothers did not teach every lesson personally, they frequently reviewed their children's progress. They examined handwriting exercises, admired watercolour paintings, listened to piano practice, and praised improvements in French pronunciation or geography. When lessons ended, children often hurried into drawing rooms, eager to share what they had learned. These conversations strengthened family relationships while allowing mothers to remain actively involved in education, despite the presence of tutors. Another surprisingly common pastime involved arranging scrapbooks. Wealthy women carefully collected newspaper illustrations, poems, pressed flowers, invitations, theatre programs, travel tickets, decorative labels, and handwritten verses before arranging them artistically within large albums. These scrapbooks reflected individual personalities, preserving memories in colourful pages long before photographs became common. Guests occasionally browsed through these collections during quiet afternoons, discovering amusing sketches, sentimental quotations, or souvenirs from journeys across Europe. Gardens continued changing even after sunset. During warm summer evenings, ladies sometimes stepped outside for a final walk before retiring. The daytime bustle had disappeared. Flower beds released stronger fragrances into the cool evening air. Birds gradually fell silent, and stars appeared one by one above the dark outlines of ancient trees. Without electric streetlights illuminating the countryside, the night sky often appeared breathtakingly clear. Some women enjoyed identifying familiar constellations, while others simply appreciated the peaceful beauty surrounding their homes after another busy day. Preparing for overnight guests involved remarkable attention to detail. Bedrooms received fresh flowers, clean water, neatly folded towels, polished candlesticks, warming pans during winter, and carefully selected books placed upon bedside tables. Curtains were drawn before dusk, fireplaces lit if necessary, and every effort made to ensure visitors slept comfortably. Hospitality extended far beyond the dinner table. A truly accomplished hostess considered every aspect of her guest's experience, from arrival until departure. The Victorian fascination with collecting continued inside almost every elegant home. Cabinets displayed delicate porcelain figurines from Germany, carved ivory from India, painted fans from Japan, crystal paperweights from France, miniature portraits, antique coins, seashells gathered during seaside holidays, and embroidered textiles purchased while travelling abroad. Each object represented more than decoration. It reminded its owner of a memorable journey, a beloved relative, or an important stage of life. Guests frequently admired these collections, encouraging conversations that wandered effortlessly from history to geography and from art to family memories. Many wealthy women developed close friendships that lasted their entire lives. Since correspondence remained the primary method of communication across long distances, these friendships were sustained through countless handwritten letters exchanged over decades. Friends shared advice about raising children, recommended books, described holidays, discussed charitable projects, and offered comfort during times of illness or bereavement. Some corresponded almost weekly, creating extraordinary collections of letters that now provide historians with intimate glimpses into Victorian daily life. Household celebrations often included servants alongside the family, particularly during Christmas or significant anniversaries. Gifts were distributed, special meals prepared, and work schedules adjusted so everyone could enjoy at least part of the festivities. Long-serving employees became almost honorary members of the household, remembered affectionately by several generations of the same family. A trusted nanny might later care for the children of the child she had once raised herself, creating relationships that stretched across many decades. Morning routines repeated themselves with comforting regularity. Before breakfast, curtains were opened to welcome daylight into rooms that had remained dark throughout the night. Fires were refreshed, flowers replaced where necessary, newspapers delivered, and breakfast tables arranged with polished silver and neatly folded napkins. The household slowly awakened according to familiar rhythms established over many years. Although every day brought small differences, the overall pattern remained reassuringly constant. The Victorian appreciation for beautiful handwriting deserves special attention. Penmanship reflected education, discipline, and refinement. Young ladies practiced elegant cursive for years until every letter appeared graceful and balanced. A beautifully written invitation or thank you note created a favorable impression before the recipient even finished reading its contents. Ink bottles, blotting paper, decorative pens, and fine stationery occupied permanent places upon writing desks. Throughout affluent homes, many women also kept detailed household account books. Every purchase, from expensive silk gowns to simple candles, appeared carefully recorded. Bills from local merchants, gardeners, tailors, booksellers, and carriage repairers accumulated throughout the month before being organized methodically. These records helped maintain financial discipline while providing valuable references for future household planning. Running an estate required far more administrative skill than outsiders often realized. Animals remained constant companions within country life. Horses grazed peacefully in nearby fields. Sheep dotted distant hillsides. Dogs waited patiently beside entrance doors. And cats wandered freely through kitchens, libraries, and sunny windowsills. Birds nested among ivy, climbing ancient stone walls, while deer occasionally appeared at woodland edges during early mornings. Wealthy women often found genuine comfort simply observing these familiar scenes from drawing room windows while enjoying quiet moments between social obligations. As the century progressed, bicycles slowly became fashionable among some adventurous women, offering an unprecedented sense of personal freedom. Cycling clubs emerged, specially designed clothing appeared, and debates filled newspapers regarding whether such exercise suited respectable ladies. Although not universally accepted, these developments hinted at changing attitudes that would gradually reshape women's lives during the decades ahead. The arrival of autumn transformed household activities. Fruit harvested from orchards became jams, preserves, and desserts. Stored for winter, firewood was gathered, heavier curtains hung, warmer blankets prepared, and wardrobes adjusted for cooler weather. Families spent more evenings indoors, creating opportunities for music, storytelling, and reading beside blazing fireplaces. Each season carried its own comforting rituals repeated faithfully year after year. Even silence possessed value within Victorian homes. Unlike the constant background noise of modern life, periods of complete quiet were entirely normal. One might hear only the turning of book pages, the scratching of a pen across paper, or distant birds singing outside open windows. These peaceful intervals encouraged reflection and conversation rather than distraction. Many women likely treasured such moments amid otherwise busy schedules filled with visitors, correspondence, and household responsibilities. Perhaps the most remarkable feature of a wealthy Victorian woman's life was its extraordinary continuity. There was also an entire world that unfolded before most of the household had fully awakened. While servants were already lighting fires, carrying hot water, sweeping hallways and beginning preparations for breakfast, the mistress of the house often enjoyed a few precious moments of stillness. Looking out from an upstairs window, she could watch thin morning mist drifting across open fields, gardeners beginning their work among dew, covered flower beds, and horses quietly grazing in distant paddocks. The estate seemed almost asleep, interrupted only by birdsong and the occasional sound of carriage wheels on a faraway road. These peaceful scenes rarely appeared in paintings or novels, yet they formed part of everyday life for many wealthy Victorian women who appreciated the calm before another carefully scheduled day began. As breakfast concluded, household life spread in many different directions at once. Children disappeared into schoolrooms with governesses, gardeners tended lawns and glasshouses, stable hands exercised horses, cooks planned elaborate meals several hours before dinner would even be served. Maids moved from bedroom to bedroom changing linens, opening windows and dusting furniture. Somewhere in the middle of this quiet activity stood the lady of the house, ensuring every part of the estate functioned together without confusion. She did not supervise every task personally, yet she remained aware of the overall rhythm, stepping in whenever decisions required her attention. The Victorian love of flowers extended beyond simple decoration. Entire conversations developed around new rose varieties, unusual orchids, rare ferns, or the latest gardening fashions imported from continental Europe. Wealthy women eagerly exchanged cuttings and seeds, with friends living on neighbouring estates, creating informal networks through which gardens constantly evolved. Receiving a rare flowering plant from a close friend was considered a thoughtful and elegant gift, one that could continue blooming for many years as a reminder of the friendship itself. Large wardrobes demanded continuous attention throughout the year. Dresses worn during summer required careful cleaning before being stored away for colder months. Winter cloaks needed brushing and repairs before autumn returned. Hats were reshaped, ribbons replaced, gloves mended, shoes polished, and delicate lace carefully folded inside protective drawers. Many garments represented months of skilled work by professional dressmakers, making proper care essential. Rather than following today's rapidly changing fashion cycles, wealthy women expected their finest clothing to remain beautiful through repeated use over many seasons. Afternoon sunlight often transformed drawing rooms into particularly pleasant places. Tall windows flooded polished floors with warm light, while embroidered curtains moved gently in the breeze. Comfortable chairs invited reading, embroidery, or quiet conversation. A piano stood ready for music whenever someone felt inspired to play. Fresh flowers added colour. Clocks measured the slow passing of time, and fireplaces remained prepared even during warmer months in case unexpected weather brought cooler evenings. These rooms became the heart of family life, hosting everything from formal visitors to peaceful hours spent entirely alone with a favourite book. Letters arriving from distant relatives generated genuine excitement. Since communication remained relatively slow, every envelope represented news from another part of the country, or perhaps another continent entirely. Families gathered, while letters were opened and read aloud, learning about successful journeys, healthy births, university achievements, engagements, or amusing travel experiences. Maps were sometimes brought out to follow a relative's route across Europe or through distant colonial territories. In this way, The outside world entered even the quietest country house through neatly folded sheets of paper covered in elegant handwriting. Many wealthy women quietly developed remarkable memories. They remembered birthdays, anniversaries, favorite flowers, dietary preferences, family connections, and countless details about friends scattered across wide social circles. Such knowledge allowed them to write thoughtful letters, select meaningful gifts, and welcome guests with warmth that felt personal rather than formal. Remembering these small details strengthened relationships in a society where personal reputation depended greatly upon courtesy and consideration. Children's birthdays transformed otherwise ordinary days into lively celebrations. Nurseries filled with laughter, carefully wrapped presents appeared beneath ribbons. Cakes decorated with flowers or icing occupied the center of tables, and simple games entertained young guests throughout the afternoon. Mothers frequently participated more actively during these family occasions than at formal adult gatherings, revealing affectionate and playful sides of their personalities that outsiders rarely witnessed. The changing colors of the countryside never lost their ability to attract admiration. During spring, young leaves created fresh shades of green, unlike any other season. Summer gardens overflowed with roses, lavender, foxgloves, and climbing vines. Autumn covered woodland paths with brilliant gold and crimson, while morning fog settled gently across fields. Winter transformed familiar landscapes into scenes of silver frost, sparkling beneath pale sunlight. Without modern distractions demanding constant attention, many Victorian women spent considerable time simply appreciating these gradual seasonal changes. Travel by railway introduced entirely new possibilities during the 19th century. Journeys that once required exhausting days by carriage could now be completed within hours. Wealthy women increasingly visited museums, galleries, concerts, seaside resorts, and relatives living far away without the same physical hardship previous generations had endured. Railway stations themselves became symbols of modern progress, bustling with travellers carrying elegant luggage, while steam engines filled the air with smoke and the sharp whistle announcing departures. Books often remained open throughout the day. Read a chapter at a time whenever quiet moments appeared between responsibilities. A woman might read several pages before visitors arrived, continue another chapter after luncheon, and finish the evening beside the fire before retiring for the night. Reading became woven naturally into daily life rather than confined to specific hours. Libraries slowly expanded as favorite authors published new works, filling shelves with novels, poetry, biographies, travel narratives, and beautifully illustrated volumes. Some ladies became enthusiastic supporters of local schools, recognizing that education offered opportunities previously unavailable to many children. They organized collections of books, purchased classroom supplies, visited lessons, encouraged talented pupils, and occasionally sponsored promising students. These efforts reflected growing Victorian interest in expanding literacy and improving educational standards across Britain. Throughout the day, bells quietly regulated movement within the house. Small servant bells connected different rooms, allowing family members to request assistance without raising their voices. The sound of a distant bell summoned tea, announced arriving visitors, or called servants to particular parts of the house, combined with chiming clocks marking each passing hour. These familiar sounds created an ordered rhythm, recognized instinctively by everyone living under the same roof. Even simple hobbies required patience that feels unfamiliar today. Completing a large embroidery project might take several months. Pressing and labeling botanical specimens demanded careful observation across multiple seasons. Learning a difficult piano composition required daily practice over many weeks before it could be performed confidently. Before guests, Victorian life rewarded persistence rather than speed, encouraging gradual mastery instead of immediate results. Toward bedtime, routines unfolded with almost ceremonial regularity. Jewelry was carefully removed and stored inside velvet. Lined cases, hair was brushed slowly before being braided or pinned for the night. Candles accompanied family members upstairs, while servants ensured fires were safely managed and doors secured. Bedrooms remained simple compared with formal reception rooms, offering comfortable spaces for rest after days devoted largely to other people. Here, finally removed from public expectations, a wealthy Victorian woman could simply become herself for a few quiet hours before another morning arrived. The more closely one examines these lives, the clearer it becomes that privilege and responsibility existed together in equal measure. Wealth removed many physical hardships, but introduced an entirely different set of obligations, centered upon leadership, hospitality, education, reputation, and tradition. Every graceful movement admired by guests rested upon years of careful practice. Every successful gathering depended upon invisible preparation. Every peaceful household reflected countless thoughtful decisions made long before visitors crossed the front door. Rather than living lives of effortless leisure, rich Victorian women quietly orchestrated the daily rhythms of some of the most remarkable homes in 19th-century Britain. Their influence rarely appeared in political speeches or military victories, yet it shaped the atmosphere of family life, preserved cultural traditions, encouraged charitable work, and maintained the refined world that later generations would come to recognize as the very essence of the Victorian age. For women who lived in the grandest country estates, life was also deeply connected to the rhythm of the land surrounding them. Every morning brought subtle changes that experienced eyes quickly noticed. A field that had been green the previous week now shimmered with ripening wheat. Garden roses reached the height of their bloom before slowly giving way to late summer flowers. Leaves along distant woodland paths gradually changed colour as autumn approached. The mistress of the house often knew these seasonal transformations almost as well as the head gardener, not because she performed the labour herself, but because the landscape formed an extension of the home she carefully managed. Looking across the estate from an upstairs window, she saw not merely beautiful scenery, but the living environment that supported hundreds of daily routines. The estate church often played an important role throughout the week, not only on Sundays, weddings, baptisms, funerals, charity meetings, choir rehearsals, and seasonal festivals regularly brought members of the local community together. Wealthy women frequently helped decorate the church with flowers before important celebrations, organised collections for struggling families, supported repairs to the building, and welcomed newcomers into parish activities. Their influence reached beyond the walls of their own homes into the surrounding villages, where they were often regarded with both respect and familiarity. Every large house contained countless small objects requiring occasional attention. Silver candlesticks needed polishing, clocks required winding, paintings demanded gentle cleaning, curtains faded in direct sunlight, books accumulated dust, carpets showed signs of wear, and porcelain occasionally suffered tiny cracks. Although servants completed these tasks, the lady of the house remained responsible for maintaining the overall beauty of the interior. She noticed when colours no longer matched, when furniture required reupholstering, or when fresh wallpaper might brighten a room that had begun to feel old-fashioned. Letters of invitation often arrived weeks before an event actually took place. Wealthy women carefully organized calendars filled with dinners, concerts, weddings, charity bazaars, hunting parties, garden fight, musical evenings, and visits to neighboring estates. Accepting every invitation would have been impossible, yet declining required tact and carefully chosen words. Social calendars therefore demanded almost as much organization as modern professional schedules, with each decision influencing friendships and family relationships. Long carriage rides offered opportunities for thoughtful observation rather than hurried travel. Passing through quiet villages, ladies noticed children walking to school, shopkeepers arranging displays, farmers working in distant fields, and smoke rising gently from cottage chimneys. They admired medieval churches standing peacefully among ancient graveyards, stone bridges crossing narrow rivers, and winding roads disappearing into forests. These journeys unfolded slowly enough to encourage appreciation of landscapes that modern travelers often rush past without noticing. Many aristocratic homes possessed extensive collections of paintings gathered over generations. Portraits of ancestors dominated grand staircases, while landscapes, seascapes, and historical scenes decorated drawing rooms and libraries. Wealthy women frequently developed genuine appreciation for art, learning about different painters, artistic styles, and techniques through conversations with knowledgeable visitors or by visiting exhibitions in London. Rearranging paintings to improve the harmony of a room became another quiet expression of personal taste. The arrival of new books from London booksellers often transformed an ordinary afternoon into an exciting occasion. Fresh volumes were carefully unwrapped, admired for their beautiful bindings, and placed upon tables where family members eagerly examined titles and illustrations. Some books contained elaborate engravings protected by thin sheets of tissue paper, encouraging readers to linger over every page. Collecting fine editions became a source of pride among educated households, gradually expanding libraries that represented decades of careful selection. The relationship between grandparents and grandchildren brought particular joy during holiday visits. Elderly ladies often possessed remarkable patience, happily listening to children's endless questions about old family portraits, forgotten relatives, or unusual objects displayed inside cabinets. They taught simple card games, supervised walks through the gardens, read fairy tales beside warm fireplaces, and shared stories about how life had changed since their own childhood. These conversations quietly connected generations separated by many decades. Even ordinary household sounds developed comforting familiarity over time. The distant ringing of the luncheon bell, the soft closing of library doors, the rhythmic brushing of horses in nearby stables, birds fluttering outside bedroom windows, the clinking of china during afternoon tea, and gentle footsteps crossing thick carpets all blended into the daily soundtrack of Victorian domestic life. Unlike the constant mechanical noise surrounding many people today, these sounds rarely competed for attention. Instead, they marked the peaceful passing of another well-ordered day. Rain brought its own special pleasures. Watching raindrops race down tall windows while sitting beside a glowing fireplace created an atmosphere of quiet contentment. Family members gathered naturally indoors, making rainy afternoons ideal for reading novels aloud, practicing music, working on embroidery, or enjoying long conversations uninterrupted by outdoor activities. The scent of damp earth drifting through slightly opened windows mixed pleasantly with the fragrance of burning coal and polished wood. As evening approached, changing light dramatically altered the appearance of every room. Late afternoon sunshine stretched across polished floors before gradually fading into softer golden tones. Servants moved through the house lighting lamps one by one, creating pools of warm light reflected in mirrors, crystal glass, and silver ornaments. Shadows deepened in corners, while fireplaces became the visual center of drawing rooms. Wealthy women understood how this gentle transition from daylight to lamplight influenced the mood of family gatherings, making evenings feel intimate and welcoming. Many ladies enjoyed observing birds that visited the gardens throughout the year. Robins hopped confidently across lawns during winter. Swallows returned with spring. Blackbirds nested among flowering shrubs, and owls occasionally appeared at dusk near woodland edges. Birdsong provided a constant background to country life, changing subtly with each season. Some women kept notebooks recording the arrival of migrating species or the flowering dates of favorite plants, combining quiet observation with genuine curiosity about the natural world. Hospitality extended even to unexpected travelers. If storms or poor road conditions delayed visitors, many estates willingly offered overnight accommodation. Spare bedrooms remained ready for such occasions, and additional places could always be arranged at the dinner table. Generosity toward guests reflected both personal kindness and long-standing traditions of country. House life, where distance between neighbouring estates often made spontaneous overnight stays practical, as well as courteous. The preparation of Christmas occupied weeks rather than days. Cakes matured gradually after being baked well in advance. Decorations gathered from nearby woodlands filled hallways with evergreen branches and holly. Gifts were wrapped carefully, menus planned, musicians invited, and guest rooms prepared for relatives arriving from across the country. Children eagerly counted the days while adults quietly organized every detail behind the scenes, ensuring celebrations unfolded smoothly once the holiday finally arrived. Many women also found quiet satisfaction in observing the gradual achievements of those around them. A shy daughter grew into a confident young hostess. A son completed university studies successfully. A faithful servant celebrated 20 or 30 years of loyal service. Trees planted during childhood matured into magnificent avenues. Gardens expanded, libraries grew, and family traditions continued from one generation to the next. These slow developments rewarded patience rather than urgency, reflecting a way of life measured in decades instead of days. By the later Victorian period, newspapers increasingly reported astonishing discoveries from around the world. Archaeologists uncovered ancient Egyptian tombs, explorers mapped previously unknown regions, scientists announced remarkable inventions, and engineers completed bridges, tunnels, and railways that transformed travel forever. Wealthy women followed these developments with fascination, discussing them during afternoon visits and evening gatherings. Although many remained physically distant from such adventures, intellectually they participated through reading, conversation, and growing curiosity about the rapidly changing world. Perhaps what defined the lives of rich Victorian women more than anything else was continuity. They lived within houses that often belonged to the same family for centuries. They used furniture crafted long before they were born, followed traditions inherited from grandparents, celebrated holidays according to familiar customs, and expected future generations to continue these practices after they themselves were gone. This deep awareness of belonging to an unbroken chain of family history shaped countless daily decisions. In many ways, the house itself became almost a companion to the wealthy Victorian woman, who spent years caring for it. She knew exactly how sunlight entered each room during different seasons, which staircase creaked on quiet nights, where the warmest corner could be found during winter afternoons, and which bedroom overlooked the most beautiful sunrise. She watched ivy slowly climb ancient stone walls over decades, witnessed young trees mature into towering oaks, and saw children who once raced through the hallways return years later as adults bringing families of their own. The house changed so gradually that every alteration carried memories of earlier times, making the building feel almost alive with the presence of previous generations. Every room possessed its own personality and purpose. The morning room welcomed the first light of day and served as a peaceful place for breakfast and correspondence. The drawing room came alive during afternoons with visitors, music, and tea. The library remained wonderfully quiet, inviting long hours of reading beneath shelves filled with leather-bound books collected across generations. The dining room transformed into a place of ceremony each evening, as polished silver-reflected candlelight and carefully arranged flowers filled the air with delicate fragrance. Upstairs, bedrooms offered calm retreats where family members escaped the formal expectations that governed public life below. Wealthy women moved naturally between these spaces, understanding the unique atmosphere each one created. The arrival of spring always seemed to breathe new life into even the grandest estates. Windows were opened wide after months of cold weather, allowing fresh air to sweep through every corridor. Heavy winter curtains gave way to lighter fabrics, gardens burst into colour almost overnight, and birds returned to fill the mornings with cheerful songs. Conservatories became particularly beautiful during this season, as exotic flowers reached full bloom beneath glass roofs, warmed by increasing sunshine. Ladies often spent long periods simply wandering among blossoms, enjoying fragrances that changed almost weekly, as one variety replaced another. Many afternoons unfolded without anything particularly dramatic occurring. Yet these ordinary days often became the ones most fondly remembered later in life. Reading quietly beside an open window while distant church bells echoed across the countryside. Watching grandchildren chase butterflies across freshly cut lawns. Listening to someone practicing the piano in another part of the house while embroidery slowly took shape beneath careful hands. Sharing simple conversations over tea with an old friend who had been visiting for decades. Such moments rarely appeared in history books, but together they formed the true fabric of everyday Victorian life. The changing weather remained a constant source of conversation because it influenced nearly every aspect of daily routine. A bright morning encouraged carriage rides, walks through gardens, or visits to neighbouring estates. Strong winds postponed outdoor gatherings and scattered flower petals across carefully maintained lawns. Heavy snow isolated country houses for several days, transforming them into peaceful worlds of their own, where families relied entirely upon one another for company and entertainment. Rain-filled rivers, refreshed gardens, and encouraged everyone to gather around warm fireplaces with books and music until clear skies returned. Throughout the year, local craftsmen regularly visited great houses, bringing new creations or repairing treasured possessions. Cabinet makers restored antique furniture, clockmakers serviced intricate timepieces, upholsterers refreshed worn chairs, glaziers replaced cracked windows, and artists occasionally cleaned or restored family portraits darkened by age. Wealthy women often discussed these projects personally, appreciating skilled craftsmanship and understanding that preserving beautiful objects required continuous care rather than occasional attention during long evenings. Conversations sometimes turned toward childhood memories. Older relatives recalled journeys made by horse, drawn coach before railways existed, Winters remembered for extraordinary snowfall, celebrations held during royal jubilees, or amusing incidents involving long-forgotten family members. Younger listeners absorbed these stories with fascination, gradually piecing together a living history unavailable in any book. Through such conversations, family identity passed naturally from one generation to the next. Music frequently drifted through the house without any formal audience being present. A daughter might practice scales simply because she enjoyed playing. Someone else softly sang while arranging flowers. A brother experimented with violin melodies in a distant room. These informal performances created a gentle soundtrack that accompanied ordinary household activities. Unlike concerts attended in cities, music at home belonged entirely to family life, filling otherwise quiet afternoons with warmth and familiarity. Books accumulated slowly but steadily throughout a lifetime. Birthday gifts, holiday presents, souvenirs from travels, and carefully chosen purchases from London bookshops gradually filled shelves until libraries reflected decades of personal interests. Marginal notes occasionally appeared beside favourite passages. Pressed flowers marked meaningful chapters, and handwritten inscriptions inside front covers revealed affectionate messages exchanged between relatives. Each volume carried not only its printed story, but also memories of the people who had owned and loved it. The Victorian appreciation for order extended even to gardens. Flower beds followed carefully designed patterns. Gravel paths curved gracefully between lawns. Climbing roses covered stone walls with remarkable precision, and ornamental lakes reflected ancient trees standing peacefully nearby. Every season required different attention. Spring demanded planting, summer brought abundant blooms, autumn involved gathering seeds and preparing for colder weather, while winter encouraged planning for the following year. Wealthy women often discussed these cycles enthusiastically with gardeners, sharing genuine pride when visitors admired particularly successful displays. Children growing up within these estates enjoyed a childhood unlike that experienced by most of Victorian society. They explored hidden corners of extensive gardens, climbed old trees, searched for birds' nests, built imaginary adventures around ancient fountains, and transformed long corridors into places for rainy day games. Mothers watched these activities with quiet affection, aware that the same grounds had once echoed with their own childhood laughter many years earlier. Many evenings concluded, not with excitement, but with peaceful routine. Candles burned steadily upon bedside tables, while the rest of the house gradually fell silent. Letters written earlier in the day rested neatly folded inside writing desks. Tomorrow's clothing had been prepared, books lay waiting to be continued, and fireplaces glowed softly before slowly fading into embers. Outside, the estate settled beneath moonlight, interrupted only by distant owls or the rustling of leaves moved gently by the night breeze. As years became decades, wealthy Victorian women often measured time not by calendars alone, but by recurring family traditions. Another Christmas gathered relatives beneath familiar roofs. Another spring brought blooming daffodils along the same garden paths. Another generation learned to play the family piano. Another daughter prepared to enter society wearing jewellery inherited from her grandmother. Life moved steadily forward, while remaining deeply connected to the past, creating a comforting balance between change and continuity. Even moments of solitude possessed quiet significance. Sitting alone in a conservatory surrounded by orchids after visitors had departed, walking slowly through gardens at sunrise before anyone else had awakened, or reading beside a library window while gentle rain tapped against the glass, offered opportunities for reflection rarely interrupted by the constant pace of modern life. These peaceful intervals allowed wealthy women to step briefly outside their many responsibilities and simply appreciate the beauty surrounding them. The Victorian world valued patience in ways that modern society often forgets. A rose garden required years to reach maturity. An avenue of oak trees might not achieve its full grandeur until the next generation inherited the estate. Embroidering an elaborate tapestry demanded months of careful work. Friendships developed gradually through decades of shared letters and repeated visits. Children slowly grew into adults, prepared to continue family traditions. Wealthy women understood this slower rhythm instinctively, recognizing that many of life's finest achievements could never be hurried. When historians examined great political events, industrial inventions, or royal ceremonies, it is easy to overlook the quieter lives unfolding behind the doors of Britain's country houses. Yet every elegant estate depended upon someone who preserved its traditions, nurtured its relationships, welcomed its guests, encouraged its children, maintained its beauty, and ensured that daily life flowed with calm dignity from one sunrise to the next. Rich Victorian women fulfilled this role with remarkable dedication. Their accomplishments rarely appeared in newspaper headlines, yet they shaped the atmosphere of countless homes where generations grew, celebrated, mourned, learned, and found comfort. Their lives remind us that history is not built solely through dramatic events, but also through the patient repetition of ordinary acts performed with care, kindness, and unwavering devotion. As one Victorian year gently blended into the next, familiar routines became almost timeless. The same carriage rolled across the gravel driveway, the same church bells echoed through nearby villages, and the same fireplaces warmed drawing rooms during long winter evenings. To an outsider, life inside a wealthy household might have seemed unchanging, yet those who lived there understood that every year carried its own quiet milestones. A child grew taller. An old servant retired after decades of loyal service. A favourite rose bush produced its finest display yet, or another generation's portrait was added to the gallery lining the staircase. These small changes accumulated so gradually that they often went unnoticed until someone paused to look back over many years. The changing light inside the house fascinated many observant women. Early morning sunshine filled east, facing rooms with a soft golden glow, making them ideal places for breakfast and reading. By afternoon, warm light streamed across polished floors in the drawing room, illuminating crystal vases and reflecting gently from silver picture frames. During autumn, lower sunlight created longer shadows that transformed familiar rooms into entirely different spaces, even without electric lighting, or perhaps because of its absence. Victorians became remarkably aware of the natural rhythm of daylight passing through their homes. Many ladies developed a lifelong appreciation for fine craftsmanship. They admired the careful carving of wooden furniture, the delicate stitching of embroidered tablecloths, the smooth finish of porcelain, the intricate movements inside mechanical clocks, and the detailed patterns woven into handmade carpets. Every beautifully crafted object represented hours, sometimes months, of patient work by skilled artisans. Rather than replacing possessions whenever fashions changed, wealthy families often cared for treasured items over several generations, repairing them whenever necessary and treating them as valuable parts of family history. Household pets frequently became silent witnesses to everyday life. Small dogs waited faithfully beside their owners during afternoon reading, followed family members through gardens, or curled comfortably near fireplaces, while guests conversed late into the evening. Cats wandered confidently through libraries and sunny windowsills, seemingly indifferent to social etiquette, yet entirely at home within elegant surroundings. Horses recognized familiar voices after years of companionship, greeting riders each morning with quiet familiarity. These animals brought warmth and spontaneity into homes, otherwise governed by careful routines. The preparation of guest rooms reflected Victorian ideas about thoughtful hospitality. Fresh flowers stood beside wash basins, clean linens, scented with lavender-filled neatly made beds. Books rested upon bedside tables, and curtains were drawn back each morning to welcome natural light. Every small detail communicated consideration for visitors. A guest who slept comfortably, enjoyed pleasant surroundings, and felt genuinely welcomed was likely to remember the household with affection long after returning home. Weather often determined the emotional atmosphere of an entire day. Bright sunshine encouraged optimism, longer walks, and cheerful outdoor conversations. Gentle rain inspired peaceful reading beside windows, while gardens seemed greener than ever. Thick fog wrapped the estate in mysterious silence, making distant trees disappear almost completely from view. Heavy snowfall transformed familiar landscapes into scenes of remarkable stillness, where every sound seemed softened beneath blankets of white. Wealthy women learned to appreciate each season's unique character, rather than wishing constantly for different weather. Afternoon conversations frequently wandered through memories, rather than current events. Elderly visitors recalled dances attended decades earlier, journeys across Europe before railways became common, amusing misunderstandings during family gatherings, or remarkable personalities they had known in their youth. Younger listeners absorbed these stories eagerly, gradually forming vivid mental pictures of a world already beginning to disappear. In this way, ordinary conversation quietly preserved history from one generation to the next. Even arranging flowers required surprising skill. Tall blooms suited entrance halls, while smaller arrangements created welcoming table decorations. Fragrant varieties were often placed in drawing rooms where guests gathered, whereas lightly scented flowers proved more suitable for bedrooms. Colours changed with the seasons, reflecting what nature provided at different times of the year. Wealthy women took genuine pleasure in creating these arrangements, understanding that flowers could subtly influence the mood of every room. Some afternoons were devoted entirely to writing, not simply letters, but lists, invitations, household notes, charitable records, travel journals, family histories, and carefully labeled photograph albums. Beautiful handwriting remained a source of quiet pride, encouraging writers to slow their thoughts until every sentence appeared graceful upon the page. Unlike hurried digital communication today, Victorian correspondence often became something worth keeping for a lifetime. The sounds drifting through open windows connected the house to the surrounding countryside. Church bells marked the passing hours. Blackbirds sang from ancient hedgerows. Gardeners exchanged quiet conversations while trimming roses. Horses trotted steadily along distant lanes. Occasionally, the whistle of a passing steam train reminded everyone that the modern world continued advancing beyond the peaceful boundaries of the estate. Yet inside the gardens, time still seemed to move according to older rhythms, shaped by sunrise, sunset, and the changing seasons. Many wealthy women also developed close relationships with neighbouring families, whose estates lay only a few miles away. Children grew up together, attended the same church services, visited one another during holidays, and eventually introduced the next generation under remarkably similar circumstances. These friendships often lasted an entire lifetime, strengthened through hundreds of shared meals, musical evenings, picnics, charitable events, weddings, and quiet afternoon visits. Their lives became intertwined through decades of ordinary companionship rather than dramatic events. During harvest season, the countryside filled with activity. Fields changed colour almost daily as crops ripened. Wagons carried grain toward barns, orchards overflowed with apples and pears, and kitchen staff preserved fruit for the coming winter. Although wealthy women rarely participated in the physical labour, they observed these annual cycles with genuine interest, knowing that successful harvests affected both the estate and the surrounding community. Seasonal abundance influenced menus, celebrations, and charitable giving throughout the colder months ahead. As darkness settled each evening, lamps gradually illuminated one room after another until the house glowed warmly against the surrounding night. Seen from a distance, the windows resembled scattered points of golden light surrounded by quiet gardens and ancient trees. Inside, conversations softened naturally as the day drew toward its conclusion. Books closed gently, piano music faded into silence, and tomorrow's plans replaced today's completed responsibilities. Many women found quiet satisfaction not in extraordinary achievements, but in the knowledge that another day had unfolded exactly as it should. Guests had been welcomed warmly, children had progressed in their lessons, servants had completed their duties efficiently, correspondence had been answered promptly, flowers had brightened every room, and family members gathered safely beneath one roof before bedtime. These ordinary successes rarely attracted public recognition, yet they represented the true measure of a well-managed Victorian household. Perhaps the greatest misconception about wealthy Victorian women is that their lives lacked purpose simply because they did not pursue modern careers. In reality, their responsibilities centered upon preserving stability within an ever-changing society. They acted as organizers, educators, hostesses, patrons, caregivers, archivists, advisors, and guardians of family traditions. Their influence extended quietly through every corner of domestic life, shaping the values, manners, education, and memories of those around them. Long after the final guests had departed, the candles extinguished, and the great house settled into silence, the work of the day remained visible in countless small ways. Fresh flowers still stood upon polished tables. Letters waited neatly bundled inside writing desks. Children's books rested where they had been read. The dining room reflected another successful gathering, and the gardens beyond the windows prepared for another sunrise. These simple details formed the true legacy of wealthy Victorian women. Their lives were rarely filled with dramatic adventures, but with something equally enduring, the patient creation of homes where beauty, order, kindness, learning, and tradition quietly flourished, day after day in the end. What they truly did all day was far more meaningful than merely passing the time. They shaped the rhythm of family life itself, leaving behind not monuments or political victories, but generations of memories, customs, and quiet moments of grace that continued long after they were gone. Even the passage of a single ordinary week carried its own familiar rhythm. Monday might begin with reviewing household accounts and discussing supplies with the housekeeper. Tuesday could bring social calls from neighbouring families or visits to local charitable organisations. Wednesday might be devoted to music practice, letter writing, and supervising preparations for weekend guests. Thursday often involved shopping in the nearest town or meeting with a dressmaker to discuss alterations for an upcoming season. Friday became a day for final arrangements before relatives arrived, while Saturday filled the house with conversation and activity. Sunday unfolded more quietly around church services, family meals, scripture reading, and peaceful walks through gardens that seemed especially calm beneath the slower pace of the Sabbath. Although every household differed slightly, this gentle repetition created a reassuring sense of order that defined Victorian domestic life. Many wealthy women became remarkably observant, without ever describing themselves as naturalists. They noticed the first swallow returning in spring, recognized the distinctive song of blackbirds before sunrise, observed which roses bloomed earliest each year, and remembered exactly when the first frost usually appeared upon the lawns. Such observations accumulated naturally through years spent living closely with the countryside. The changing landscape became a familiar companion whose subtle transformations marked the passing seasons more clearly than any calendar hanging upon a wall. Family photographs gradually replaced some painted miniatures as the 19th century progressed. Sitting together after dinner, relatives often opened large leather-bound albums filled with carefully arranged photographs protected by delicate tissue paper. Each page prompted another story. Someone remembered the holiday during which a picture had been taken. Another recalled the child who refused to sit still, while an older relative laughed at fashions that had seemed perfectly elegant only a decade earlier. These quiet moments transformed photographs into treasured gateways to memory, rather than simple images. The library remained one of the few rooms where conversation was never expected. Family members entered quietly, selected books from towering shelves, settled into comfortable chairs, and allowed silence to fill the room naturally. Occasionally, someone looked up to recommend an especially interesting passage. Otherwise, only the turning of pages disturbed the peaceful atmosphere. For many wealthy Victorian women, the library became a sanctuary where intellectual curiosity could flourish without interruption. Visitors frequently remarked upon the fragrance inside well-managed houses. Fresh flowers filled drawing rooms, lavender-scented linen cupboards, beeswax-polished wooden furniture, and gentle coal fires created a comforting warmth during colder months. Kitchens released aromas of freshly baked bread, cakes, or preserves prepared from fruit gathered in nearby orchards. Walking through the house became a journey through changing scents that reflected both the seasons and the activities unfolding within each room. Many ladies also maintained collections of handwritten recipes received from mothers, sisters, cousins, and close friends. Margins often contained little notes describing which desserts had been especially successful at Christmas dinners, or which cakes children particularly enjoyed. Over time, these recipe books became deeply personal records of family celebrations, preserving memories alongside practical instructions. A pudding served during a granddaughter's birthday might have been prepared according to directions first written by her great-grandmother half a century earlier. The arrival of evening newspapers occasionally introduced fresh topics for discussion around the dinner table. Reports describing archaeological discoveries, scientific inventions, parliamentary debates, or royal ceremonies sparked thoughtful conversation among educated families. Although women possessed limited political power during much of the Victorian era, many followed current events closely, forming informed opinions that quietly influenced discussions within their households and social circles. There were also countless small acts of kindness that rarely appeared in official records. A warm meal quietly sent to an elderly widow living in the village, a basket of fresh fruit delivered to a family recovering from illness, extra blankets provided during an especially harsh winter, school books purchased anonymously for children whose parents struggled financially. These thoughtful gestures often occurred without public recognition, because many Victorians believed true generosity should remain modest rather than celebrated. Gardens changed character completely after sunset. Moonlight reflected softly upon ornamental ponds, pathways disappeared beneath long shadows, and fragrant flowers released stronger perfume into the cool night air. During warm evenings, some women enjoyed short walks beneath the stars before retiring, appreciating a peacefulness impossible to find during busier daylight hours. The great house behind them glowed gently with lamplight, while the surrounding countryside settled into silence. The relationship between generations remained central to Victorian family life. Grandmothers patiently taught young girls embroidery stitches that had been practiced within the family for decades. Mothers explained the etiquette expected during future social gatherings. Aunts shared favourite novels, while older cousins offered advice about music lessons or upcoming dances. Knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next through daily conversation rather than formal instruction, ensuring traditions survived without ever appearing forced. Many wealthy women also became skilled observers of human character. Years spent welcoming guests from different backgrounds taught them how to recognize shyness hidden beneath confidence, loneliness concealed by cheerful conversation, or quiet intelligence overlooked because someone spoke little during large gatherings. A thoughtful hostess often guided conversations gently toward topics that allowed every guest to feel included. This emotional awareness represented a subtle but valuable social skill developed through experience rather than formal education. The changing fashions of interior decoration provided endless opportunities for creativity. One year emphasized richly patterned wallpapers inspired by medieval designs. Another favored lighter floral motifs influenced by nature. Furniture arrangements evolved as families grew or entertaining styles changed. Mirrors reflected additional light into darker rooms, while carefully chosen paintings balanced walls already filled with family portraits. Wealthy women approached these decisions with surprising seriousness because the appearance of a home reflected the character of those living within it. Quiet evenings beside the fire often encouraged thoughtful reflection. Looking around a familiar room, a woman might notice the piano her daughter first learned to play, the armchair where her father always preferred to sit, the portrait painted shortly after her wedding, or the clock that had measured time faithfully for decades. Every object carried memories layered upon ordinary usefulness, gradually transforming the house into a living record of family history. As daughters matured into adulthood, mothers gradually stepped back from responsibilities they had carried for many years. Younger women learned to host dinners, organize charitable events, supervise households, and welcome visitors with the same grace once demonstrated by their own mothers. This gentle transfer of responsibility rarely occurred through dramatic ceremonies. Instead, it unfolded naturally across countless ordinary days as experience slowly replaced instruction. Toward the end of the Victorian era, the outside world was changing faster than ever before. Motor cars began appearing on roads once dominated entirely by horses. Electric lights slowly replaced candles in some wealthy homes. Telephones connected households that had relied upon handwritten letters for generations. Yet despite these remarkable innovations, many of the values shaping everyday domestic life remained surprisingly constant. Courtesy still mattered. Hospitality remained essential. Family traditions continued to unite generations. Beautiful surroundings were carefully maintained. Conversations still unfolded over afternoon tea, and evenings often concluded beside familiar fireplaces rather than hurried distractions. Looking back today, it becomes clear that the true occupation of a wealthy Victorian woman cannot be summarized by a single activity. She was never simply drinking tea, attending parties, or wearing elegant dresses. She was preserving traditions without realizing future generations would admire them. She was creating welcoming homes where families gathered year after year. She was encouraging education, supporting neighbors, maintaining friendships across decades, protecting family history, nurturing children, organizing celebrations, and quietly shaping the atmosphere in which countless lives unfolded. Her influence was rarely loud, rarely dramatic, and almost never recorded in headlines. Instead, it existed in beautifully prepared rooms, thoughtful letters, comforting routines, cherished family memories, and the enduring sense of stability that made a Victorian house feel not merely grand, but truly alive.